Darkcast Network, the light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
I'm Jackie Moranti, and I produce a podcast called Cause of Death, 100 Seconds to Midnight. Have you ever read or watched any post-apocalyptic fiction? Were you one of the first people to see The Road or I Am Legend when they came out? Do you wonder if those things could really happen? Could the world as we know it be toppled by a disease, a global crisis, or a natural disaster? I assure you that it could. My show talks about the precursors to apocalyptic events. I like to call it pre-apocalyptic nonfiction. I talk about history and how we never learned from it, the present and how we tend to ignore every warning sign, and the future and what it will mean if we don't take care of our resources. Join me as I take you on a trip through history to the present day, and we take a peek into the future, a future that can only be bright if we all take action now. It is, after all, 100 seconds to midnight, and the hands of the clock are only moving closer to the end of time. The hands of the doomsday clock have been set at 100 seconds to midnight for 3 years now. Can we make the hands turn back? Cause of Death, 100 Seconds to Midnight can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. If you haven't listened to my podcast, you should.
Hey, I use swear words and I talk about senseless murders and crime. And that's my disclaimer. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. Find me on the socials. Just about everywhere is Rainbow Crimes and Darkcast Network. Become a patron on Patreon at the unicorn level and receive ad-free, early release episodes and an extra episode at the end of every month when we take our unicorns out for a ride and I tell you a story of true crime not shared here on the main show. It's called a Patreon exclusive episode. This episode, I wanted to talk a little about the FIFA World Cup. If you aren't a sporty kind of person, you're probably asking, what's a FIFA? It's soccer's equivalent to the Academy Awards, I guess. The Academy Awards is a competition between movies, actors, directors, etc. to win against other movies, actors, directors, etc. FIFA Men's World Cup is also a competition that occurs every 4 years. The event lasts about a month long. The best male soccer players and teams from around the world meet up in a pre-chosen location and they compete to be the best. This year, the chosen location was Qatar, which is a Middle Eastern country and the very first Middle Eastern country to host soccer's World Cup. Qatar used to be one of the poorest states in the region, but thanks mainly to its oil exports, it's become one of the richest. Human rights groups have accused Qatar of modern-day slavery, claiming that the migrant workers at the stadium where the FIFA Cup World Cup is being held had their passports seized and must work under grueling conditions. Doha is the capital of Qatar. The majority of its residents are Muslim. There are no trees in Qatar unless they were planted in a citizen's private garden. Qatar has the lowest female population by percentage of total population. Just 24.7% of its population is female, meaning there are 3 men for every woman. I would think that would be an opportune place to live if you were a gay man. But, and this is a big but, this is an enormous but, a vast portion of Qatar's inhabitants hate the LGBTQ community. It's illegal to be gay in Qatar, and it's punishable by 3 to 15 years in prison if caught. Caught trying to live your truth and being who you are can land you in a Middle Eastern prison. I'm half Lebanese, Middle Eastern, and while I love my heritage, I am ashamed and embarrassed of the Middle Eastern countries that have not progressed in their way of thinking. They still believe in honor killings and the persecution of someone who loves who they love. Weeks prior to the FIFA World Cup soccer tournament, there were LGBTQ people that were verbally abused, beaten, even arrested by police and security forces. At least 6 people, 4 trans, 1 bisexual woman, and a gay man were arrested, and they were put into an underground prison in Doha. One was beaten so badly that they lost consciousness. They were all forced to sign cease immoral activity statements. One trans woman was beaten until her nose and lips were bloody. Another was forced to shave her head, and yet another was sent to a psychiatrist to learn how to be a man again. This is absolutely unacceptable treatment of human beings. Humans who have committed no crime other than trying to be who they are. It's infuriating. And the folks hosting the FIFA World Cup Soccer Championship, also known as football to those not in North America, were not silent about the fact that the LGBTQ plus community were not welcome in Qatar, and if they show up, they would have to abide by Qatar's laws and rules. They did not want their children learning something that they deem not good. Because loving people, even if it is the same gender, is apparently not good. Okay, ya idiots! The FIFA ambassador, a former Qatar soccer star, he even said, homosexuality is damage of the mind. Hang on, let me look at the calendar real quick. Yep, it's 2022, not the 1950s. In September, 7 European teams alerted FIFA that the captains of each team intended on wearing One Love armbands to support the LGBTQ as they played in Qatar. FIFA quickly punished these players. Most likely they were fined and warned that if they did so, they weren't going to be able to play. FIFA isn't necessarily anti-LGBTQ, but they were trying to be supportive of the host country. Hey, here's an idea, FIFA. How about letting a country who isn't anti-LGBTQ host and gain revenues from this event, since it only comes around once every 4 years? It's a privilege to be able to host this, just like it's a privilege to host the Olympics, as it brings in tons of money for the hosting city. The same kind of bullshit happened 4 years ago when Russia was the hosting country. And we know Russia is not supportive of the LGBTQ community. Earlier this month of December, an American journalist, 49-year-old Grant Wall, was in Qatar. He was covering his 8th FIFA World Soccer Championship. I believe the day was either the 9th or the 10th of December. Grant wore a rainbow pride shirt in honor of his gay brother, Eric Wall. Grant wore the same shirt on November 21st when the United States played Wales. But when he showed up, he was not admitted entrance to the stadium unless he removed his shirt. So on December 9th or 10th, he decided to try his luck again, and he wore his gay pride shirt. And that day, he must have been allowed inside, because later that day, he collapsed, and he was being carted off to the hospital where he would die. Qatar officials said Grant died of heart failure. Grant's brother Eric believes this to be utter bullshit. Grant seemed to be in pretty good health until he wore that pride shirt to the match. Eric believes his brother was somehow murdered because he was displaying support for the LGBTQ in an anti-LGBTQ country. Considering the treatment of the LGBTQ, even prior to the FIFA World Cup Championships, and after the fact that Grant received death threats after he wore his shirt in November and then reported on Qatar, I think that's a pretty fair guess. Although Grant had announced on his podcast that he had not been feeling well. He hadn't been sleeping and he went to the clinic at the media center to get checked out twice. He said he had bronchitis for a week, and he thought maybe that's why his chest had hurt and felt so much pressure on it, and this happened days leading to his death. It's been reported by Grant's wife, who is a doctor. Grant died from an aortic aneurysm. Now here's Jackie from Cause of Death podcast. She's my resident expert on ailments. She's going to give us information on an aortic aneurysm.
Hey CJ, so you were asking me about aortic aneurysms. An aortic aneurysm can happen either in the thoracic cavity of the chest or, more commonly, they happen below the chest cavity in the abdomen. An aneurysm is sort of a bulge in the aorta, which is dangerous enough on its own, but if they dissect or rupture, then the situation becomes pretty dire. The way an aortic aneurysm works is that the blood pumping from the heart through the aorta causes pressure, and that's what causes the aneurysm to begin with. And then after the pressure gets so bad, the aortic wall becomes weak, and that's when dissection or rupture occurs. If the force of the blood splits the layers of the artery wall, this is called dissection. What happens is blood leaks between the layers, and the patient can slowly bleed out internally. If the aneurysm bursts, this is called a rupture, and ruptures cause major blood loss inside of the body. Both of these situations cause the most deaths from aortic aneurysms. Aneurysms are caused by a history of smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, hardening of the arteries, and some connective tissue or genetic disorders. So there you go, that's aneurysms. Thanks for the question, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jackie. I'll get in touch soon about this weird mole I found. Just kidding. So it looks like Grant was ill before he passed away. But I don't know. I think if I were in Eric's shoes, deep down I'd still feel like someone did something to kill my brother after the backlash he received from officials in Qatar. We must remember Qatar still treats its LGBTQ citizens like shit. Let me reference a case from several years back. A gay Filipino man living in Qatar was working for the hosting of World Cup soccer as an office assistant, and this was in 2018. He was online looking at a dating site, and he was contacted by what he thought was a gay Turkish office worker. The Turkish worker even offered the Filipino man money if he would come to his hotel room. The Filipino man took the Turkish man up on his offer, and he showed up to the hotel room. Once at the hotel room, the Filipino man found 6 men in the room. All were later identified as Qatari police officers. They allegedly beat and gang raped the Filipino man over and over again, and they held him captive. While he was still there, another gay man arrived. Both men were arrested and accused of being male sex workers. The Filipino man had to sleep in jail overnight in Qatar, and then he was transferred to a deportation center where he had to wait 2 more days to get his passport and plane ticket back to the Philippines. This year, just weeks before the FIFA World Cup, a British LGBTQ activist named Peter Tatchell was arrested for protesting. He was protesting the horrid human rights record in Qatar. At the time of his arrest, he was wearing a #Qatar anti-gay shirt. Peter and a colleague were surrounded by 9 police officers and security. They were held for nearly an hour and questioned. They were told they had to leave the country after the colleague's phone was seized and pictures were deleted from the phone. The 2 went back to the UK, thankfully unharmed. In 2016, a gay man whose pen name is Majid, he wrote what it's like living as a gay man in Qatar.
My country hates me. I am the worst of worst. I am vermin,
he wrote. Can you imagine how a whole country against you could make you have a low to zero self-esteem? It's very cruel. Majid went on to say that after the Pulse Orlando nightclub shooting, residents of Qatar were saying gays are God's cursed people. They all deserve to die. They should have all died and done humanity a favor. This breaks my heart that anyone, Nevertheless, the majority of a whole country could be so hateful. And mention God's name in the same breath? What the fuck kind of God are you people worshipping? Is he orange and has a bad comb-over? Majid continues to write that the people of Qatar believe homosexuality is a Western invention. Invention. Do I have a trademark stamp on me somewhere that I'm not aware of? Do these people not believe in science at all? Like genetics? Majid finishes his essay with,
If I had a choice, if there was a magic pill I could take to make me straight, then I would take it. I don't want the misery of this life. I am in constant turmoil and anguish. How do I reconcile who I am with my faith that says I shouldn't exist? I want people to accept us. Live and let live. You don't have to like me, but you don't have to persecute me.
and that's been a little look into what it's like for LGBTQ people in the country of Qatar. I still say, don't give countries like this a chance to host an event where all walks of life want to enjoy the event. Not until they wake the fuck up and start giving solid, positive attention to human rights for all. Our true crime quickie this episode comes to us from Florida. This case is a cold case from over 30 years that's finally been solved. Kinda. A gay 25-year-old man named Rocky Taylor was murdered in a citrus orchard in 1988. His badly decomposed body was found by a rancher who was mowing the orchard. 3 shotgun shells were found near Rocky's body. He'd been shot twice in his head and once in his back. The detectives investigating the crime thought they knew who the body belonged to. They thought they knew the body was Rocky's, but they had nothing to identify the body. They even thought they knew who the murderer was. But again, they couldn't do anything until they could confirm who the body belonged to. Then in 2020, fresh investigators with the cold case unit were on the case. They reached out to Rocky's brothers. One lived in Texas and the other in Alabama. Both brothers agreed to give their DNA because all this time they had no idea what happened to their brother. Once the samples were collected, they were sent to a lab in Texas. And then COVID hit, and this caused the facility to close down until the imminent threat of COVID passed. When 2021 rolled around, the samples had been tested, and the body found in 1988 was Rocky Taylor's. The suspect detectives had in mind was Rocky's boyfriend, Michael Akins. A friend who Rocky and Michael had lived with said that Rocky and Michael were constantly fighting, both verbally and physically. Michael didn't like the fact that Rocky drank so much, and Rocky didn't like the fact Michael's demeanor was so effeminate. This was generally the reason behind many fights between the couple. The friend had also went to detectives to report when Rocky was missing, and his suspicions that Michael had murdered Rocky. But the hands of the investigators who suspected Michael of the killing, they were tied. How could they possibly arrest someone when they couldn't even identify the body found? They would have arrested Michael and had him put on trial as soon as they received the DNA results back identifying Rocky in 2021. But Michael died in 2015. Cold case closed. Rest in power, Rocky. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. Remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.